Abd Ali Fahad, and today I'll be presenting to you my ISU summative presentation on parenting styles. My thesis question and hypothesis. My thesis question is, how do different parenting styles affect the child's development? My hypothesis is parenting styles have a huge impact on a child's development. There are four types of parenting styles. One is authoritarian parenting. In the authoritarian parenting style, parents are very strict and have high expectations for the child. This results in children becoming socially awkward, as mentioned here. The children also tend to have a hampered confidence and have aggression, and increased aggression compared to other children. This is because the parents have instilled into them a type of strictness that leads to aggression. Another type of parenting is authoritative parenting. In this type of parenting, parents are strict to their children, but they also provide them compassion and love. This type of parenting is the most successful type of parenting. The outcomes of this parenting is very positive. Children, as mentioned here, tend to have high social skills because their parents provide them assistance and allow them to voice their opinion. They have self-control because their parents provide them a balance between discipline and reward. Children also have a very high self-confidence because their parents support them and give them motivation. The other type of parenting that I have is permissive parenting. In permissive parenting, children are brought up with very limited rules. Parents provide the children with excessive love and affection. Therefore, if they find it difficult to discipline the child when they break a rule, the outcomes of this type of parenting is very negative. Children are very useless and not useless. They're not able to control themselves. They have a disrespect for authority, and they struggle academically because they don't have that self-control that most other children have. The next type of parenting is uninvolved parenting. This is considered very rare because not much parents raise their children in this method, but unfortunately this type of parenting happens in this time. In this parenting, the children are totally ignored by the parents. This may be because the parents are busy due to work or other social matters. Children are also provided their basic rights, yet the parents are, like I said, ignored. They ignore the child. There's also no supervision and a lack of nurturance and love to the child, because of the parents' hectic schedule. And this affects how they interact with the child. The outcomes are obviously very negative, quite similar to permissive parenting. There's a lack of respect for the parents, because since the parents are not within the child's life, they don't have that respect for them, and they're not taught how to respect their elders. They're emotionally withdrawn. They don't have anyone to talk to. The parents ignore them, so this leads to social awkwardness and being not emotionally connected with society. They also end up being very delinquent because there's no supervision, and as they grow up, they take advantage of this, and this may lead to delinquency in adolescence. Now I'll just be explaining the Indian type of parenting because it's one of the many types of parenting methods that are here in Canada. In the Indian type of parenting, there's a very big emphasis on school. Parents will pay a lot of money to get their children to go to school. Maybe not in Canada, but in India this is the case. Religion is a very important factor. Parents will build their morals and values around their religion. Usually the children are disciplined by quite harsher than how Canadians are disciplined. Usually through corporal punishment by spanking. There's a very huge emphasis on respect of elders. So children who usually argue with their parents, things like that, that is not acceptable because, like mentioned before, it disrespects elders and it's seen as a very huge, very big sign of disrespect. And also, social life is very limited. And even if your marks are very low, if your marks are very low, your social life is if your marks are below par, your social life is practically non-existent. Now the Chinese type of parenting. Um, 4 years ago, there was a Yale professor, Yale Chinese American professor by the name of Amy Chua. She wrote a book called The Battleheim of the Tiger Mom. Here she basically mentioned how she raised her children according to Chinese ideals and methods. And it sparked a lot of outrage and debate in the United States. She mentioned how she was very strict to the children and she pushed them and forced them to do things. She insulted them, she humiliated them, she motivated them through humiliation and shame. This type of parenting is known as authoritarian parenting. It's like Chinese parenting, but in China, it's also it's different because they have one child, so the parents push the child. They push the child to perfection. Also, one important factor is that Chinese parents will try to push their children to put a very big effort. Instead of using intellect, they'll say put effort, and this will allow the child to, you know, put enough work, put enough hard work to attain their grades and their objectives. Now we'll go to how a typical Canadian family raises a child. So obviously it's less severe than other cultures, and I'm not trying to be like stereotypical, but this is just a pattern that is seen through most parents in Canada. A parenting method is it varies from family to family. So obviously families will have different methods, but these are the main ones that I see in Canadian families. For example, academics are not as emphasized as other cultures. Canadian parents will tend to let their children choose their own pathway, whereas in Chinese and Indian cultures they are just forced to go to a certain direction. Canadian families tend to be more free. They allow their child to explore, to be they're more open, like free and open to sensitive topics such as homosexuality, sexual issues, LGBT issues, drugs. They're more open to these type of topics. They tend to be very less harsh in discipline compared to other cultures, and they also usually are more. They allow the children a little more freedom. For example, they allow the children to go to parties, and curfews are very different from other cultures. For example, I had friends that had curfews at 12 at the age of 18, whereas I had to come home by 8. And you see, there's that difference, is I think is very significant in the way they both cultures raise their child. Mine being Bangladeshi Muslim / Indian, and my Canadian peers being Canadian. This type of parenting is also known as authoritative parenting, as you can tell. I also like to discuss the immigrant culture in Canada. When immigrant families arrive in Canada, there's usually a clash of cultures because their culture contradicts with the Canadian culture, and this may result in all the immigrant parents to force their child to stick to their own beliefs and not conform to Canadian ideals and morals. So, for example, some Indo-Canadian families, what they do is they still have arranged marriages within Canada. This is one of the examples of the fact that they want to stick to their own beliefs. They may also see Canadian and Western culture with a negative connotation. For example, a lot of Indian parents may abhor the concept of dating or drinking, things like that, which aren't common in their country origin, in their original countries. And so this has an effect on the children. I want to highlight this. The children, they will realize that they are different from the rest when this type of thing happen. This affects the child because, they see their peers growing up differently, and they're influenced to follow Western culture from friends, schools, and society in general. So as they grow up, they may envy their Western peers because they'll see that they're growing up in a more free. Not this is not necessarily always true, but usually they'll see them growing up in a more free environment while theirs is very restrictive. Like like when I compare it to my curfew to my friend's curfew, we had very big differences, and I think this affects how some immigrant children will view their um, parents' culture is very negative. So this topic is very it's extremely important. This is because I think obviously I have many points here, but what I'm trying to say is that there are many different parenting methods, many different parenting ways, and people need to see what ways they think is good for their children, and what ways they think, what to take from a lot of immigrant families, especially in some places like Canada and the United States. They have to know what type of practices they have to bring from their families back home, and what type of practices are good from this place of the world. What type of Canadian family traditions and Canadian parenting methods are good from here. And so I believe that basically what I'm trying to say is that parents need to know what's good for the child and what's not. They shouldn't be held back by a dogma or belief that they originated from back home, and they shouldn't feel like aliens when they come to another country and make the child treat the child like aliens. They should be able to conform to Canadian belief, Canadian morals, and bring practices from back home and merge them and try to improve the way they raise a child. I think the only way this could happen is if through discussion and debate, parents and society will be able to find the most effective way to raise a child. My informed opinion. So according to my research, parenting methods have a big impact on a child's development. I believe the most authentic and successful parenting is authoritative parenting. This balances both discipline and love and compassion into one, and I think it brings out the best within a child. Not saying the others are bad, but this is seen as the most successful through scientific research and experimental observation. And so this is both has been supported through my research, both my primary and secondary research. So overview of what we learned from this presentation. I went through the 4 types of parenting: authoritative, permissive, uninvolved. Indian parenting. What you have to take from Indian parenting is that there's a huge emphasis on education. Everything revolves around that. Chinese parenting, similar thing to Indian. Education is very big, but Chinese one significant factor for Chinese parenting is that they put a big emphasis and importance on effort. That the child must try their best. Immigrant families coming from other countries into Canada may want their child to stick to their own culture, as opposed to conforming to Canadian morals and values and making that being part of their life. And so this affects immigrant children, and they're less. This affects them both psychologically and mentally. The end.